Good job. Okay, so the idea behind the shir is the shtiba wants to offer the women halacha, hashkafa, shiurim, and everyone seemed to be on the same page when it comes to halacha. The interest is in kashrus, and that's for good reason, because if you think about it, the center of every good Jewish home, the most important room in the house, is the kitchen. And a lot of mitzvahs happen in the kitchen. The achrasas orchim, we think it's the dining room, really it's in the kitchen where it starts. When Rav Noach Weinberg Zatzal was nifter, he was the founder of Eish HaTorah, which at the time was a crazy concept to take people who have no connection at all to Yiddishkeit and put them into yeshiva. It didn't exist before his time, and it was his idea, and it was obviously very successful. At his shiva, supposedly his wife said that my chalent was makar of more people than my husband. Her chalent brought more people close to Yiddishkeit than her husband did, and that we all know that's the way to a man's heart, is through his stomach. So, Hachrasas Orchim, Einik Shabbos, Hafrashas Chala, and we connect with people in the kitchen. So it is an extremely important facet of the Jewish home, and obviously the woman usually is in charge of that facet, and therefore it's very important for us to have a clarity in these halachas. Because the kitchen can be a very challenging place, halachically speaking. I'll tell you a story. When I was engaged, and I was at my in-laws' house, and I must have finished eating something, so I put the spoon into the sink, and it was the wrong sink. It was the fleshik spoon into the milchik sink. So my mother-in-law said, she's a very tough woman, and she said, it's the wrong sink. I said, I'm sorry. She said, don't be sorry, just think next time. So, whoa, okay, okay. But she was right. I learned to appreciate it. That she was right, that a Jew always has to think. And in the kitchen especially, even if we guarantee that all the food that comes in is kosher, there's still the potential for things to go wrong, right? You take milk, 100% kosher, and meat, which is 100% kosher, you put them together, and you have a very serious isser. If there are non-Jews around the house. And then also with Bishul Akum is another potential problem. You can take something that's inherently kosher, and a person can turn that into an isser. And then Hilchos Shabbos as well. If one is not careful with how they deal with the hot food on Shabbos, also there can be potential desecration of Shabbos, as well as the food might become usher in certain very rare cases. So those are the three areas I want to focus on in the coming months: the kashrus, the Bishul Akum, as well as the Hilchos Shabbos. So that's going to be the plan. Now, the point of this shir is not to turn everyone into poskim, into halachic deciders, because that takes years and years of training for that. But at least it's to make us aware of where the questions are. And I once heard a shir from Moshe Hyman who was saying that people think that if a certain rabbi doesn't get any shilas in kashrus, so that person's kitchen must be very kosher. And Hyman was saying, it's the people in the shul that don't ask him the shilas. He said, they know everything, and the ones that do, he knows that they're on the ball. So shilas happen left and right. I tell you, when I had my first year of marriage, I would go we lived in Maladaf in Yerushalayim, and I would go to the Rav, to Rav Nachum Eisenstein, with a chicken in my hands. On a Friday afternoon, my wife saw a very badly bruised bone. And there could be a shayla if the flesh around it is all disgusting and rotted. I didn't know that. I just knew that if there was a bad wound to the chicken, it could be a broken bone, it could be a problem. So I would go to the Rav with my chicken on Erev Shabbos, like in the shtetl. And we can't be embarrassed to ask these questions, and that's the way we learn, and that's the way we end up becoming proficient. The good news is, there's two pieces of good news, and that is that with relatively few concepts, one can really earn a mastery in these halachas. It's not as complicated as other areas of halacha, and there's around 8 or 10 concepts that over the next few months I want to introduce, that once we know these, so then it's, you can pretty much, I would say, you'll know 80% of the shaylas. Whether you'll have the confidence to actually say what the halacha is, or at least you'll know what to ask, that can be done relatively easily. So that's the good news. And also in kashrus, the more you learn, the more you find out what's mutter. I find in Hilchos Shabbos it's the opposite. Hilchos Shabbos, the more you learn, the more you see what's a problem. In kashrus, the more one learns, the more one sees what in fact is allowed. So I printed a few copies of this little concept sheet that I put together, and I want to go through some of these concepts here, and then bring some practical shilas and hopefully get a clarity on the Indian. Any questions so far? Okay. So we're starting from the basics. I don't want to assume anything, that anyone knows anything. I find both in Halacha as well as in Gemara that when the foundations are not clear, when they're weak, that everything is weak. But if we can strengthen the foundations and make sure we have a clarity in the basic concepts, so then later on we can get more complicated and it's easier to digest. No pun intended. So the first concept is the food itself. So whenever one is analyzing a shiloh in the kitchen, one has to identify what's the form of the food. What form is it in? So the first thing is called the actual mass, which is mamashas. Right? So for the definition is the food in its concrete state, for lack of a better term. The example there is a piece of meat, a cup of milk. Right? So you have actual, let's say, a piece of pork. That's iser, mamashas in front of us. That's the actual thing that's also. The second form that the food could be in is that of taste, which is called tam. Right? The definition there is the absorption of food particles into a different mass. So for example, you cook a cholent in a pot and you clean it out with soap and water. You can use it in a little hot water, and that pot is spanking clean. That is a fleishig pot because it has absorption of fleishig in the walls of the pot. There's like 7 different ways, I think 10 different ways absorption can happen. That'll be the next year, Be'ez Hashem. But that is an example of taste, of tam. So the example here is meat that is cooked in a pot imparts meat taste into the walls of that pot. Hence we have fleishig pots and fleishig cutlery and milchig, and that's tam. So we have mamash is the actual physical mass, and we have the tam, which is the taste that gets absorbed into, and it can get into food as well. If the potato that you had in the cholent, even if you don't see any meat in the potato itself, if it was a fleishig cholent, when you take that out, that potato is fleishig because it has an absorption of fleishig tam in the potato. The same thing, the truth is, potentially speaking, in certain cases, if you would cook a soup in a fleishig pot, a vegetable soup, in a fleishig pot, that soup could also become fleishig. There's another concept called anat bar nat, which we're not going to get into tonight, that if it's 2 steps removed from the original source, then it's not a problem. But if it was pork, if you had a non-kosher pot, by accident, the cleaning help brought her own pot, and she left it there, and you cooked a vegetable soup in a pot that was used for pork, so it could be that soup is mamish also with the iser of pork, with iser of chazer, because the taste of the pork in the pot goes back into the vegetable soup and prohibits it. When it comes to basa b'chalav, it's a bit we're more make when it comes to the taste going from the meat into the walls of the pot into a soup, but that's a different discussion. So that's the actual mass, the mamashas, and the tam. The second concept is the taste, how the food tastes. So we have 2 types of taste. We have positive and we have negative. So positive is l'shvach. Definition is that either you have a piece of meat that tastes good, a piece of chaz that tastes good, and it's fit for human consumption. That is aser. And when it comes to taste, if it tastes good, if it imparts a positive taste into the mixture, so then it's going to be a problem. So if I cook my vegetable soup in the pork pot, that pork is going to give a good taste into the soup, and it's going to prohibit the soup. It's interesting to note that it's exeris akasav that the pasuk says that when can I not eat nevela, unslaughtered meat, when I can give it to my non-Jewish friend. If my non-Jewish friend would eat it, then I can't eat it. But if he wouldn't eat it, then I can eat it. What does that sound like? Right? The isser of basa b'chalav, chazer, and non-kosher fish, and bugs, all these things are only aser if I can give it to the nachri, to the ger toishin. But if the non-Jew wouldn't touch it, then I'm allowed to eat it. So that sounds like bishul akum, kind of. I mean, the Torah only prohibits food in general when the non-Jew will eat it, when it's fit for human consumption. But once it's no longer fit for human consumption, then midaraisa I can eat it. It's a very interesting concept. I think it's a remez to ba'achali akum, to bishul akum in that halacha. But either way, that's the halacha, right? So if the meat is not edible, the non-kosher meat, technically speaking, you can eat it. And that's number 2, negative. If the definition there is an actual mass of food that is unfit for human consumption, or the absorbed taste that's been in the vessel for 24 hours. Right? So if I tell you, there's a piece of pork, can I eat it? So you have to ask, is it fit for human consumption? If the answer is yes, then you can't eat it. If the answer is no, it's disgusting and putrid, then if you want to, you can eat it midaraisa at least. What about tam? I come to you with a pot. I said, there's been pork cooked in this pot, and I made a vegetable soup in the pot. So can I eat this soup? So what shall do you have to ask? has it been there for has the pork been cooked within the past 24 hours? The taste in a kli is only l'shvach, and only imparts a good taste if it's been there for less than 24 hours. So in the example on number 2, a spoon that was used to stir a meat stew more than 24 hours ago. So that meat stew, or that spoon, I have a spoon, and I stirred the cholent on the pot, and now that would happen the Sunday night, and now I have the spoon, and I mixed my macaroni and cheese with the spoon. What's the halacha of the macaroni and cheese? It's mutter. Because it's been 24 hours, that meat absorption in the spoon has been there for 24 hours. Once it's been there for 24 hours, it's tam l'shvach. It has a negative imparting taste into the whatever food it's going to go into, and therefore it's mutter. So why do I have to have milk in a fleishig cutlery? Why can't I just, I'll have fleishig one night, I'll wait 24 hours, I'll use it for milk, right? So Chazal felt that we'd get confused. We all agree to that. We get confused, and therefore, if it ever had a meat absorption, we're going to have to kasher it with hagala. Put it into boiling hot water, and the time comes out. Yeah.
But why is it more than 24 hours just not a taste? What makes it negative?
The taste like ruts, it goes off. We're not going to taste that. We're not sensitive enough. We see from the Gemaras, they're much more sensitive to taste than we are. So objectively, there's going to be a bad taste going into the food, but we're not going to pick up on it. I mean, either way, we're not going to pick up on it, even if it's good. So this is a very important halacha, right? Nice and tam of gam is mutter. If it's a bad taste, it's mutter. And that happens when the taste has been in the kli for 24 hours. So therefore, if I were to ask you the following question, I put a milchik spoon, I stirred my cholent with a milchik spoon. Cholent was on the fire. What is the status of the cholent? That you can't possibly answer that question with the information I gave. Right? A good posek, the first question, when he gets that question, he asks back, when was the last time the spoon was used for milk? I'm sure you've all experienced that question thrown back at you. Right? When was the last time it was used for milchig? Because if it was, it's today lunch, we're having fleishig, last night dinner was milchig, it was around 15 hours ago, it's going to be a problem. If you start talking about nullification maybe, but it's going to be a problem. A real bona fide good milchig taste went into your cholent. But if the last time you used it was two days ago or 1 day ago, 24 hours, so then that spoon is parv. The spoon is really parv. It's just that Chazal made a decree you can't use it for anything other than milchig. But once it's been 24 hours since I used it for hot milchig, that spoon is in effect parv. It will not answer anything else. So it's an unbelievable halacha. That means, if you think about it, what percentage of utensils and pots in your house is parv at this moment? So you had dinner tonight, but most, right? In a guy's house, what percentage of their utensils are kosher? Me'ikr hadin. It could be everything. In Melbourne, you go to holiday houses, and the minhag is everyone goes away for a few weeks in the summer. You go to a holiday house. When you get there, at least a day into it, everything there is kosher. You can't use it. Please don't misquote me. Obviously, this is going to go on the kosher website, I think, and the Shtiebel website. Be careful. I'm not saying that you can actually use it, but since it's been 24 hours, so as long as there's no mamashas there, as long as it's clean spoons and forks and knives and pots, really me'ikar adin, if your kid would by accident use that to heat something up, it wouldn't aser it b'di'evet, it would not become prohibited. Because it's nice and tam of gam. It's a very important halacha. Any taste that's been for 24 hours in the pot is mutter. There are exceptions when we're dealing with davar chara. Kashrus is very hard because there's no real good place to start. I don't want to confuse everyone, but there are certain exceptions where I can bring back the taste. So like, for example, if you take a knife that hasn't been used in weeks, and you cut garlic with it, you'll reawaken that taste. The sharpness of the garlic or of the onion has the ability to reawaken the taste. But hold off on that for now. In general, anything that's been 24 hours that's not been used for hot is going to be parv. Okay, so again, let me ask you, and I'll hear what you have to say, hopefully. You take a milchik spoon, and you mix cholent in a pot. So we have to clear 3 things now. What's the status of the spoon, the status of the cholent, the status of the pot? Mrs. Sobel will put you on the...
Well, when was the spoon used last?
Okay, excellent. So let's say it was more than 24 hours.
Okay, so the spoon was parv, or
Right.
not dairy.
Right.
So the spoon is now meat, would have a meat status, right?
Right. So you'd have to kasher the spoon now because
Yeah,
the
kasher
spoon
the
has its
spoon.
dairy absorption from days ago, and now meat absorption. You can't use that for anything. That has to go with the kashering stuff, and the cholent and the fleshig pot. What would potentially? What's the thing that's going to prohibit the cholent? The milking spoon.
Right.
The milking spoon it's not really
Right,
milking.
It's not really milking. So
it's
it
not
should be
good.
okay.
Yeah.
So Sholem should be okay to eat.
Right. So the only time this is a common occurrence, at least in my house, where things are going in the wrong genders with the milk and the fleshig, it's only going to be a problem if one of them has been used in the past 24 hours. So if you have a parva soup in a fleshig pot, and you mixed it with a milking spoon.
Oh God. Okay.
It's complicated, but once we get these basic ideas, every shayla is the same. It's the same. One question you always have to ask: milchig spoon, fleshig pot, vegetable soup.
And if none of it had been used in the last 24 hours, it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, everything is part of it.
Everything
Everything
should be
bidi
fine.
evet is part of it. Let's say it like that. Everything is bidi evet part of. Right? And once that's the case, you can have that soup in al-khatchili. You can have that in the first instance. So the most important question always is to ask, when they come and say, it was a milchig spoon or fleshig pot, why is the spoon milchig? Why is the pot fleshig? And if it's a milchig spoon that you used, we'll get a little more complicated now, maybe we'll just throw something out. Let's say it's a fleshig spoon that you used, you had chicken soup. Right? It's chicken soup. So it was your fleshig spoon that you used in the chicken soup, and then your kid used it for the hot macaroni and cheese. And you want to know what's the status of the macaroni and cheese, of the milchig bowl that it was in. So you cook soup in a pot, and then you take a ladle, you take it out of the pot, you put it into the soup bowl, and you serve it, and the person takes a spoon and puts it into the bowl. So that's at least a cliche. Right? The only time absorption is going to happen, it has to be yad soda disbay, which is 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 Celsius. If it's less than that, there's not going to be any absorption. And if it's a klisheni, this could be already klishlishi, depending on how you deal with your ladle, what material it is, and when we get to Hilchot Shabbos, we'll get into that more. But, it's not always necessarily fleshig, even though you used it within 24 hours, even though it was used with heat. So it's always important. The first thing that the Rav always has to do is identify, is this fleshig, is this milchig? And often the case is that it's not. And that's where we see that things that we think are aser are really mutter, at least after the fact. Obviously, we can't use these things lechatchila and the other with milk with fleshig and so forth, but b'diavad it won't be a problem.
And is this for any material, the spoons? Like metal spoon, plastic spoon? Like what is the...
Yeah, so it's for any material. The only thing you have to be careful about is that there's no mamashas. In that, let's say you have a knife, a serrated knife, or if you have a spoon that has a slotted spoon, if there's some like fleshig that's like stuck there from before, so then you have mamashas. We're talking now about tam, about taste. When all you have is taste, that's the case. So let's take this case. Let's say you put macaroni and cheese into your fleshig oven. Fleshig oven, macaroni with milk and cheese uncovered into the fleshig oven. So what's the status of the oven now? Yeah, it's milk, it's fleshig, it's both. You have to kash the oven. Self-clean is the best. Right? Fine. What about the macaroni and cheese? So what are you going to ask?
When was the oven used last?
When was the last time? So we'll say it was more than 24 hours ago. But is there mamashas in the oven? We also have to ask. Yeah, it might be greasy. So if it's black and it's unrecognizable, it's just like it burns. That's nothing. But if the stew spilled over and you have some grease, you have something there, you can have mamashas there. If there's mamashas there, then there could be a problem. But so we always have to declare: is it taste? Is it mamashas? If it's taste, is it a good taste or is it a bad taste? Those are the two things you always must keep in mind. I just we had an interesting shot that's not directly related to this, but just this morning. And that's why we had the challah tonight left over, and it was heated up in a disposable aluminum foil pan, because somebody, who will remain nameless, when he put the milk, maybe she put them, it's probably he though, put the milk into the fridge, it was on an angle, and it was dripping. And where did it drip? Of course, onto the fleshig challah pot. In the fridge, it's all in the fridge. There's a concept called kavish kumavoshel, which means that if a solid is soaking in a liquid for 24 hours, the taste goes in back and forth. So if you have a piece of meat in a bowl of milk for 24 hours. You take the meat out and you wash it off. That meat has absorbed milk, and the milk has absorbed meat. Kavush k'mavushul. If it's pickled, but it works even with water and milk, things like that, that affects a transfer of taste. So the milk was sitting under the pot. So let's say it wasn't, but let's say it was 24 hours. So there'd be an absorption from the milk into the pot. But the cholent was fine, because it was such a small amount of milk that it wouldn't answer the cholent. But the pot is a problem, because now the pot has an absorption of milk. So isn't that fascinating? I have a treif pot, now we have to kasher it, with kosher cholent inside. Because when it comes to the cholent, it was batal b'shisha. We'll get to that soon. It was a nullification. But the pot itself now has an absorption of milk. So we have to kasher the pot.
Was it dripping outside of the pot or inside?
It was outside. But even so, it's sitting on the milk. What was that?
So the outside absorbs? Yeah,
the outside absorbs, it goes in the whole way. It would go into the cholent as well.
Porous, right?
Yes, so all these halachas are based on the assumption that the pots and pans and forks and knives we use are porous, right? That was definitely the case back then. With high-grade stainless steel, it's not really porous, right? Which means if you would cook fleishig, you clean it out, you boil water, you send it to a lab, you're probably going to find parts per million maybe of fleishig. That being said, we treat it as fleishig because I'm assuming it's because we never know what's going to change. It's going to be very dangerous to say that you can use a stainless steel pot for both milk and fleishig, right? So, but you're right. It is based on the fact that it's porous, and therefore, if it's sitting in liquid for 24 hours, that liquid is going to go through the pot into the cholent and onto the cholent. That's how we approach it. Right. So these are the basic concepts. These first two concepts that will help us with, I would say, close to half of the shilas that come up. We can already answer half of those shilas with these two concepts of the form and of the taste. Okay, let's move along to page 2, to the other side. Okay, so now we get into mixtures, right? I'll tell you my shahaya. It didn't happen in my house, but I'll tell you the case I heard, and then we'll see this and see what the halacha is. There was a child who was eating pizza on Friday for lunch. And I guess he warmed it up in the oven on tinfoil. When he was finished, he crumpled up the tinfoil and he shot it towards the garbage. He wasn't a good basketball player. And believe it or not, it landed in the chicken soup. How would you react? Right? It's a good thing I wasn't home. It didn't happen to me. But, so it landed in the chicken soup. So the mother came and she took it out and whatever else the kid, who knows, but that's what happened. So what now is the status of the chicken soup? It's Erev Shabbos, it's a bar mitzvah, let's say, it's Shabbat Bros, to make it more dramatic, right? So what's the status of the chicken soup? So there's two types of mixtures. Let's skip to 4, because that's the more common one, which is liquid mixtures, right? So if the prohibited substance and the permitted substance have the same taste, that's called min b'minoi. It's the same min, the same type. For example, a liter of non-kosher tallow, non-kosher meat, let's say, non-shechted meat gravy falls into the kosher. Right? Let's say that happens. It actually once happened in Melbourne to an elderly woman whose father was a shoichet. So she knew a lot of Hilchos Treifus. And she was a great-grandmother already at that time, and she made chicken soup for her whole family, for all the grandkids, like 15 families, a massive thing of chicken soup, and he gave it to all of them. Then she noticed that on one of the chickens, one of the bones was curved. There was like, not an indentation, like it went out, like a bump. There was a bump on one of the bones. That means that there was a broken bone and healed. And if you get a chicken, often the chicken you get, you'll see they have broken bones in it. But that's not a problem. It happens after it dies. When they defeather it, after it was shechted. When it's defeathered, it gets knocked around in the process of the malicha, whatever it might be, you see a broken bone, it's not a problem. Again, we said before, if the broken bone is surrounded by rotting flesh, which probably wouldn't end up in the supermarket shelf, but if that happens by some chance, that's a big shiloh. But here she noticed that it was a broken bone that was healed. Now she only knew that because her father was the shaykhit when there was no real hashgacha there, and he did it, and he would show her things. So we have a bona fide shiloh of treifus here. And so it ended up being a whole big to-do about how many chickens did she use, and it actually incorporates both these, number 3 and number 4. But that could be a case. Let's say you made your chicken soup, and one chicken that we realized was treif. and then that chicken soup falls into another chicken soup. So that's the same taste. So you have kosher pot A over here, you have treif pot B, and a little bit falls into there. If it's liquid, which is the case by chicken soup, then you need 60 times against it. That's whether it's min b'minoi, the same taste, or whether it's number two, different taste, min b'shein minoi. For example, a drop of milk falls into a pot of chicken soup, right? You need, either way, you need 60 times one against the other. So if you're going to have 60 times in that kosher chicken soup against the treif chicken soup, or you'll have 60 times against the pizza, the cheese that's on that tinfoil. So this kid took his tinfoil ball and threw it in, right? So you don't have to calculate, this goes in volume, 60 times the volume of that ball of tinfoil, right? It's enough to calculate, let's figure out how much cheese was on there. So it could be maybe like this much cheese was on there. So for sure you're going to have 60 times that in the chicken soup. So the halacha is you take the ball out and you eat the chicken soup. It's 100% lechatchila, but it's batal b'shishim, it's nullified in 60. To the point that some Chassidish Rebbes say, I think it's the Bnei Yissaschar, there's actually an inyan, it's good to eat food that Isser was nullified in Heter. I mean, you can't do that lechatchila, you can't do that in the first instance, but if it happened, it's taking the koyach of Ra, the evil, and turning it into good. The Chassidim have such a concept, but even we, the literally, we have a concept that it's a shail of apikoros, a person who wouldn't want to eat that. I mean, the Torah says this is mutter. So to throw it out is probably bal tashlis. It's wasting food. If you have 60 against the milk, I mean, you find your 2-year-old pouring milk into the child, and you stop it, right? And it was only a little bit, it was this much, and you have a massive child. So that's 100% mutter l'chatchila. And you know that's what I mean when I say that we think certainly you think what's the classic issur is milk and meat, and sometimes it is mutter. Yeah.
Should you even try to take it out? Meaning,
yes.
If there's a little spill, like are you scooping that part out, or? Good
question. So when it comes to mixtures, it's only when it's not recognizable. So if I see the white area floating there, I must take that out. Mm-hmm. But if by the time I got there it was already gone, then it's fine. But yeah, mixture is only if it's not recognizable, the issur from the head. So that's when it comes to liquid mixtures. If you have 60 against it, so it's mutter. So let's go back into original shayla. The guy comes and he says, I had a milking spoon and I stirred the cholent with the milking spoon. What's the status of the cholent and of the pot? So first question we're going to ask is, when was the last use? And he says it was used 5 hours ago. So now it's a bona 5 hours ago on the stove top mixing macaroni and cheese. Let's say, right? If it's used for cereal with milk, then it's not milking. Unless it was sitting in the milk for 24 hours. That you don't have to ask. It doesn't happen usually. So we have, let's say the guy says, no, I used it to mix my macaroni and cheese on the stovetop. It's a milking spoon. So what's the next question we're going to ask? Yeah, okay, how much mamashas was on it? But also, since it was used to stir the macaroni and cheese on the stovetop, so it's full of tam, of taste of milk, even if it was clean. So you have to figure out now how much cholent do we have against the spoon. And you're going to have usually 60. You're probably going to have more than 60. So it's going to be very hard to ask the cholent. The spoon has to be kosher, because the spoon was milk, and now it's also fleshik. It's both. You have to kosher the spoon. But as far as asering, prohibiting the cholent, so that's going to be difficult, because either it's an eino ben yoyma, has not been used for 24 hours, or you're going to have 60 against it, but sometimes you're not. It's going to happen sometimes you're not going to have it. You know, if you heat it up, something milking in a fleshik pot that was used within 24 hours, that's going to be a problem. Because you're not going to have 60 against, if the whole kli is your cholent pot, right? Person takes a cholent pot, he puts macaroni and cheese into his clean cholent pot and he cooks it. So you can ask him, when was the last time you used it? If it's within 24 hours, then it's going to prohibit the macaroni and cheese. But also, it's very important to know, because often you ask, so when was the last time you used it? I don't remember, I'm not sure, maybe. So once you're not sure, it's called an eino ben yoyma. Unless you can tell me for sure it was used within 24 hours, it's not going to prohibit b'di'evet. It's also very important, because often things aren't clear. It's always a suffix. I'm not sure, maybe. So it's going to be mutter. So let's take another case. Question, yeah? Yeah. You're on a roll.
You're measuring ta'am by surface area? Like, what are you measuring?
You're measuring by the volume of the spoon. Let's just say, argument's sake, the whole spoon went in. The whole spoon fell into there, to the milking. So the whole spoon, the truth is you only have to really cheshbon it based on how much went into the milk and went into the fleishing. So let's say it's the spoon part plus a little bit of the stem with the whatever it's called. All right, so if you have 60 against that, it's going to be mutter. So let's say someone smeared margarine, part of a margarine, on a hot piece of toast. Now it was a fleishing knife. It was a fleishing knife. So what's the status of that toast? A hot piece of toast. Just came out of the toaster.
The toast was buttered.
But the knife is fleishing. The knife that you're smearing the margarine is
So
fleishing.
you're saying, what is the toast? Is it
What's the status? The knife is fine. The toast is parves. The knife is okay. What about?
Used recently?
Oh, so it was used in the past 24 hours. You were cutting a hot stew with it.
Oh,
So your toast is going to be
so it's
fleishing.
inflation.
But you see that once we know these 3 or 4 concepts, so I mean, how many shalas now we can answer? Anyone have a shala came up the past week or 2 or 3, and they can remember these type of things? You know, these things happen all the time. At least in my house. Any time you're taking the wrong utensils, going to the wrong place, you're always asking. Last time it was used with heat, as well as what the shear is. And if we understand that, then many things become simple. Let's just go back to number 3, dry mixtures, which is less common in a house setting. It happens for sure in kashrus and industrial and shchita all the time. But if it's a dry mixture, until now we were talking about a liquid mixture, right? Gravy and liquid mixture means as long as one of them is liquid. I mean the tinfoil, the bowl of tinfoil with the cheese on it into a chicken soup, that's called a liquid mixture. But if there's because in a liquid mixture there's an impartment of taste from one to the other. But in a dry mixture, you have to say you have 1 kosher chicken, 2 kosher chickens with 1 treif chicken. They just get mixed together. That could happen in a shechita. That could happen. There's once in Australia they and people here like tongue is a delicacy. They like it, right? So the way it works is you shech the animal. We won't get into details here, but you shech the animal, and then they hang it up, and then they have to process the animal. So part of the thing is the tongue is not attached to the animal when you get it, right? At some point, then you have to cut the tongue out. That's just the way it works. So they do that well before they check the lungs for trephus. The only trephus we check for is the lungs to make sure there's no adhesion from the lung to the chest cavity. That happens minutes after they take the tongue out. So they have to mark the tongue. They tag the tongue with a number. They tag the carcass with a number. And the liver also, they have to figure out how to wait to get the tongue. They just make a hole in it and put it like one of those twist ties around it with the number on it. Most places. Anyway, so they have to keep track of it. So once they lost track, they realized like the guy he finished the tags for the tongues, but there were still 3 behemoths left to shecht. So there was something wrong. There was something. So theoretically speaking, it could be here it's different, but if we know the majority of the tongues were kosher, then we can be machshir all the tongues. Now there could be other reasons why not. There might be other cheshbonis there, but that's called a dry mixture. So it doesn't happen in our house that you get a non-kosher chicken mixed in with 2 kosher chickens. But if that does happen, let's look at the example here. 1 piece of non-kosher meat, this is number 3 in part 2. 1 piece of non-kosher meat fell onto a plate containing 2 pieces of kosher meat, and the non-kosher meat cannot be identified. All right? That's a mixture of min b'minoi. The halacha is that since the majority is kosher, so therefore the mixture is permitted. And ideally one should discard 1 piece of meat because you don't want to eat all 3 because then for sure you're eating it. But that doesn't happen that often in our kitchens. But okay, so I hope that was clear. So just to review, the basic concepts that we discussed was the 2 forms that the food can take, mamashas and tam. And important to remember, the 24-hour question is only relevant when we're talking about tam. So in the oven, if it's a clean oven, it's a shaila of tam. But if it's a dirty oven, you have mamashas. If the knife is serrated, you might have mamashas there. So it's mamashas versus tam. Then we had the idea of tam l'shvach and tam l'fgam, whether it's a good taste or a bad taste. Right? When it comes to mamashas, it's not so relevant. A rotting piece of pork is potentially mutter to eat. But what's more relevant is tam. Tam after 24 hours does not impart a good taste, a good flavor, and therefore it's mutter b'di'evet, l'chatchila after kasher the kli. But after the fact, it's really considered parav, and therefore anything comes into contact with it's not going to compromise that thing's kasher status. And then the concept of mixtures, of bittul, nullification. If you have 60, it's going to be mutter. Any questions? Yes.
Why is it for liquids the number is 60th, but for dry mixtures it's majority? Like what's it? Where do those numbers?
Because by liquids, when it's a different taste, right? So the Isser is imparting a taste in the heter, right? So that taste, Chazal they estimated that when you have up to 60 times the volume of the Isser, you'll still taste that in the heter. In other words, if one piece, a kazayas of nevela falls into my of non-slaughtered meat falls into my vegetable soup, right? If it's 59 kazaysim in the soup, I'm going to taste that piece of nevela of non-slaughtered meat. Therefore, it's awesome. Once you have 60, it's mutter. And they decreed on any liquid mixture, even if it's the same taste. So the short of the long is that since by liquid mixtures taste is imparted one to the other, we have to make sure we don't taste that. That's going to happen only when you get to 60. When you have one piece of non-kosher meat, 2 pieces of kosher meat, that non-kosher meat is not affecting the kosher meat. So we can go after the typical principle of majority. Anything else? Okay. We'll hold it here. Thank you for coming. Ms. Sobel, can you hit the button again?
Yes.
Such a great job.
Pleasure.